Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please join me in Gasho. Namo Amidabits, Namo Amidabits, Namo Amidabits, Namandabs, Namandabs, Namandabs. How is everybody? I hope that you are holding up well considering the circumstances that we find ourselves in. I hope that you are staying safe. I hope that you are communicating with loved ones and keeping in touch with the people that you hold most dear during this difficult time. So, this has been a long time that we have been in this current situation. I find myself falling into a lot of old vices, let's say. And the particular vice that I'm talking about is this bad boy right here, my cell phone, which is basically my constant companion and a source of terrible, terrible addiction at the moment. My numbers in terms of screen time have exploded to a point that I simply do not wish to confess them to you, and so I will not. And I bet you if you really look at yourselves and think about this a little bit, you'd probably find that you're spending a lot more time scrolling through social media and looking at your phone and reading articles online and those sorts of things. And the hours that you're probably investing in this now are much higher than they were at a different stage in life. Now, that being said, even though the numbers that we're looking at in terms of our investment in social media and news sites are probably bordering on farcical at this point in our lives, I think that it's important for us to recognize that this is something that is happening to a lot of people, and it's not necessarily a great thing. Our social media feeds are littered with examples of really not great news. Kind of shocking, terrible news in a lot of ways, right? I mean, you're looking at examples of violence between, unnamed federal agents and protesters. You're looking at economic distress for small businesses all over the country. You're looking at abuses of power by elected officials. You're looking at willful ignorance on the part of citizens when they're actually confronted with a legitimate plague. And you're looking at a lot of imbalances of power and control within our own country for actual citizens. And it's really easy to fall into the cycle of becoming kind of obsessed with looking into these things and reading about these things, especially with COVID-19. I'm something of a news junkie myself, and I'll read article after article. My wife will tell you I'll just keep scrolling endlessly from op-ed to op-ed, from post to post. And I will just burn through every example of Twitter, every post on Twitter or Reddit that I can find. And as I'm consuming all this content, I have to recognize that it's really not very good. It's a pretty terrible thing. I usually just tell myself that it's all in the guise of being informed. That's why people do this stuff, right? They want to be up to date and they want to know how to deal with situations when they arise in their real lives. But the truth of the matter is that it's not really helping all that much. Because very little of what we consume in terms of when we're scrolling through all this information constantly is really all that useful to us in the long run. In fact, it's actually downright detrimental to our health in a lot of ways. It's been proven that if you spend lots of time scrolling on your phone through different apps, they'll actually increases your overall anxiety and your stress levels, causes you to miss out on sleep, and can actually be detrimental to the relationships around you as a whole. So it's pretty bad for the most part. And there's actually a term that has been described recently that's just entered into the vernacular for this, and it's called doom scrolling, which is I think the perfect term for it. And it's when you spend, as I just described, hours upon hours reading articles online about COVID-19 or social unrest and those sorts of things, when you're engaging in this constant, endless cycle of bad news, when you're constantly hunting for political updates and other shoes to drop and that kind of thing, when you're really looking for anything that will kind of stimulate your brain and elicit some sort of sense of emotional outburst. And this could be anything. It could be something that makes you angry, even. It could be something that gives you pleasure like maybe even a Schadenfreude, something that allows you to derive pleasure from watching something. And like these can be things that are not great. It could be like literally scrolling through like terrible articles and posts and looking for, videos of people getting angry about like wearing masks and then getting kicked out of a Target or something like that. Not a great look for them, and honestly not really a great look for ourselves as well, I would say, if that's the type of thing that we're like constantly like looking for and deriving pleasure from. The truth of the matter is that like it's really nefarious, the type of thing that's happening with doom scrolling. Because again, it has very little to do with the very purpose that we would do this in the first place, of trying to be informed and learning about like COVID-19 and the world around us. It's really just an addiction. And it's really all about like a thirst for entertainment and stimulation that we're not getting right now in our regular lives that really just can't be satiated because of the conditions. Realistically speaking, as much as we read about COVID-19, there isn't really like a cure-all or a grand narrative that can truly synthesize everything that's happening around us. And there really isn't like a panacea for like the social unrests in our country that can be like ground down into a fine, specific narrative. It's a very complicated issue, obviously. And all of these issues will take time and effort and reflection enough for us to actually reach some sort of understanding of them and to actually act upon them. And if we're consuming all this stuff online constantly, it's not helping. It's just working to negatively affect our health and establish, like I was talking about, anxiety and stress and that kind of stuff. So that said, the experience of doom scrolling is actually like a perfect metaphor, though, for suffering in the context of Buddhism. Endlessly like flailing from one dystopian scenario to another is actually kind of like tumbling through the different like mandala realms, if you think about it. Talking about like the historical mandala, it's like life after life you are being reborn into these different realms, like the realm of animals, where you are kind of a base creature, or the realm of Azure warriors, where you are kind of like an antagonistic, angry fighter, or you can be born into the realm of like the arrogant gods or the hungry ghosts, where it's all about your hunger, insatiable desires. And you can't really find any happiness or pleasure until you are born as a human, attain enlightenment, say the Buddha's name, escape it. But in another sense, your mind is kind of like this all the time as we're doom scrolling, right? We're constantly jumping from one experience to the other, one topic to the other. We're seeking one outrage after the other. We're quickly moving from an article about COVID to an outrage video about masks. And then from there, you jump over to like an angry post from your relative about politics. And from there, you jump into some like really slanderous negative campaign ad that makes all of us feel terrible about ourselves in the end. And at the end of the day, you're not better for any of it. And you haven't learned anything. It's just this emotional sensation. It's just total blindness and suffering, ultimately. All led by our emotional reactions to these things. And as the Buddha teaches us, no human being can be happy like this, moving from one thing to the other, constantly unsettled. Ultimately, the goal of Jodo Shinshu and historical Buddhism is to free ourselves from this type of doom scrolling, this type of thinking that we have, this addiction to these kind of emotional responses. Now, don't get me wrong. It's important for us to be informed in terms of what's going on in the world. Informed voters, of course, make the best decisions in terms of policies. They decide based off of logic rather than emotion. And moreover, social change relies on communities that are becoming aware of injustices in the world that exist around us and are willing to actually politically fight for those changes over time. And ultimately, that's a little bit different than passively consuming content to the point of hurting ourselves. And that latter thing, that's what we have to be concerned about here. So my recommendation is, and again, I'm working on this myself, is maybe putting the phone away every once in a while and taking the opportunity to look around and consciously turn our attention to the other things that exist in our daily lives, our friends, our family, our pets, the passions, the things that we really care about, our hobbies, and our own self-health. And again, it is always an opportunity to turn back to the teachings of the Buddha and reflect deeply on what they mean to us. And hopefully, that when this situation is over, we can see ourselves again and we can talk about it and find some clarity as a Sangha. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. Please join me in Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu.